For this album, I used my Artist 12 Warr Guitar. This is made by Mark Warr, and this was the first album I used a Warr Guitar on, because for the first two albums I used a Chapman stick.
Okay, so I recorded the Ironic Divide, most of the rhythm guitar parts with this guitar. This is an Ernie Ball Music Man John Petrucci model 7-string guitar with an all rosewood neck. This was a custom limited edition model that came out with just this wood recipe with a maple top, Adler body in emerald green. And I like this guitar because it's got a really, really thick, punchy tone. Just really, really punches.
So a lot of different drums were used actually on this album, but the main kit consisted of a Tama Star Classic kit, maple kit. It was built like right around the 2000 era of Star Classic kits. So it was one of the Japan-made Star Classic Tama kits. Beautiful open sound, really big drums. We used two 24-inch kick drums on the album. And I believe that Jim at Transient also used subwoofer kick microphones in front of the kick drums to enhance that low end on the kicks. So it's just massive, massive drum, kick drum sound. We had 3 rack toms across the top, 2 floors, this snare drum, which I'll get to in a second, and then a variety of Paiste cymbals to color everything in. We used a lot of like the cup chimes and bell chimes, a lot of accent cymbals. I actually had a 2002 Paiste cymbal that is discontinued. It was probably made in the 90s. It's a red label. It's a really nice cymbal. And if you listen closely, you can hear that in the recording. It's just a massive crash of sound, like both spectrums of crash and China kind of combined together. But this drum in particular is really special. It was used on the Ironic Divide album because it's really one of a kind. Actually, it's 2 of a kind. This is one of 2 drums that was made by Jeff Ochiltree. He's a drumsmith maker. If you're not familiar with him in the drum world, he's very well known. He used to be John Bonham's drum tech, and he went into drum making somewhere in the, I think, the 80s or 90s, and he started making drums with Paiste, and it didn't last very long, but the ones that he made are very coveted after, sought after, and very valuable. And so I was able to contract him right around the early 2000s, right before this album was made, to get this drum produced. And it took about 2 years to get, was forged in Duluth, Minnesota, and it finally got to me sometime after that. But massive drum sound. It's a 14x8, very powerful drum. You can hear it on the album. Every time I hit the snare drum, it's this guy. And it's just a beautiful work of art, and I was happy to have it on the album. It's actually one of the very few times that I've recorded with this drum, and it just came out beautifully sounding. So if you ever get a chance to see one of these in person, it's pretty impressive. The drum itself weighs about 40 pounds, but you know, when you crack that thing, you know it's a Paiste drum.
My parts were recorded over the course of 3 days with Jim Sywick at Transient Studios. We were in the control room and recorded Warr Guitar direct. We recorded the basic tracks and then went back over and did a handful of overdubs later on.
So the recording process that we used for a lot of the rhythm parts on the Ironic Divide were multi-tracking. So what we did is we actually laid down left and right guitar parts, rhythm and lead parts, and then we layered sometimes the same parts with different tone structures, different amps at various levels, just to make it really thick. And then once we found that recipe that we liked, we replicated that for pretty much all of the rhythm tracks throughout the album.
So interestingly enough, the drums were not recorded at Transient Sound. They were recorded in Jim's studio. And I think it was probably over 2 or 3 days. It was pretty quick. We knocked the drums out relatively fast for an album as complex as this, but we were really dialed in when we got in the studio, and it all happened pretty quickly. Somewhere there's some video footage of the recordings. Don't know where that is. Jason, do you know where that's at?
No, but I would love to find
I would love to find that. Jason was actually standing over my shoulder for a good portion of, I think, Ironic Divide when we were recording that. And somewhere, buried somewhere, is some tapes of that. We'll have to dig those out. But it was, I think it was 3 days possibly. We ripped it out pretty quick. Jim got all the drums cleanly recorded. We had clean signal and everything. It was pretty fast.
The demo to this recording was done on Chapman stick, and I wanted the Warr Guitar, which was at that point hadn't even arrived yet. So I borrowed a Trey Gunn model Warr Guitar from somebody out in the suburbs and recorded certain parts using that. And eventually mine came in and we recorded the rest of the album at that.
All right, so one of the interesting aspects of the Ironic Divide album is that the solos on most of the songs were not recorded with this guitar. I actually preferred to use a 6-string guitar for it. Just had a little bit more control over where my fingers were going and some of the speedy parts and whatnot. So I think I recorded most of the solos on 6-string guitars.
So when I got the, when I received Jason's notes for this album, I didn't have a whole lot to go on besides the notes, and I should have brought them with me, but you can see it's like pages and pages of, it'll say like Ironic Divide at the top, first part, and then it has all these like numbers and time signatures within it, and there's probably like 10 or 15 different time signatures within like the first minute. And so I remember looking at it and going, I don't remember anything of what he's playing there. And I would, I'd have to reference back. I think he had a demo recording of him doing it, a pretty rough one at that. And that's how the album was recorded, you know, or sorry, it wasn't recorded, but it was demoed, and we went through that process. I thought it was something really interesting. A lot of it was written out, and just had to kind of hack your way through it. And then when we had a chance to get together, we'd somehow pull it all together. And I thought that was a pretty interesting process, very unlike you know, anything I'd done before, but really effective for this kind of music. It actually turned out really well.
Two parts that stand out to me on this record, one from the bass side of the Warr Guitar, the other's from the melody side. From the bass side, it's the part 3 breakdown in the Ironic Divide. There's a section that bounces between 9, 10, 9, 11, and it requires absolute concentration, which I absolutely love about that part. For the melody side, I really like the guitar solo that I took on Where Once Bore Wings. It's one of my favorite guitar solos I've taken to date on the Warr Guitar.
All right, so my favorite moment, musical moment on the album, it's hard to describe where it is, but it's about 3/4 of the way through the Ironic Divide song. And when you hear it, you'll know it, because it goes into complete mayhem and it sounds like everything is going crazy, and then all of a sudden it comes together and we're really tight, and then it goes mayhem again, and then it comes together and it's really tight, and then it breaks out into a pretty cool solo, and it's one of my favorite parts of the album.
So I actually have 2 moments, but the first one of which is the beginning of Ironic Divide. It starts out at a really nice pace for a 20-minute song and kind of prepares you for what's going to happen. But the reason it's my favorite is because we're all in unison at the beginning of that riff. And the riff is so powerful when you hear it. We're just so tight together and everybody's really playing the same thing. I'm replicating what Jason's playing on the stick. Even his little ghost notes, I'm replicating with the kick drums. Mike is playing the same thing. We're all in unison for that first riff, and it's just so powerful the way it comes across the speakers. It really sets the listener up for what's going to happen. And then right immediately after that, we just go into this really heavy melodic groove, and I just think that's got to be my favorite moment of the album. My second is probably later in that song. We go into almost a really straight as you can possibly play it, real meat and potatoes, 4/4 groove. And these guys are doing dun 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 dun. They're just chugging along, and it just is so simple yet so powerful and effective. It just really makes an impact as a listener.
I would say that what I try to bring to the music is the unique approach of a unique instrument. Playing the Warr Guitar and having those 12 strings, the way it's tuned, the way it's played, automatically makes me think a little differently than, say, a guitar player or a bass player. So bringing that unique perspective to the music is what I try to do with it.
What do I bring to the music? What I try to do with AZIOLA CRY is I try to take Jason's ideas and use them as a foundation to lay a tapestry on top of. Some things that I hear on top of what he's got going on, and then some things that I hear on top of what Tommy's got going on. And what I try to do is try to be the medium between those two guys and tie all of us together. Sometimes I play more together with Jason. Sometimes I try to lock in with what Tommy's doing. And sometimes I try to bring both of those guys together.
I think for me, what I tried to bring to the project when I started with the band was, and I started right before this album was recorded. So this was new material for Jason and Mike, and I kind of came into it learning it right after it was written, I believe. Ghost Conversations was the album before this one, and I wasn't on that. It's a brilliant album, but I had listened to that many times to learn it so we could play it live. And what I kind of wanted to bring to the new album was kind of a more like strong, just a lot more of a statement, I guess, in the rhythm section. Jason and I really, when we're locking on a part, it's hammered down your throat, and that's kind of what we were going for, something really intense, primal. It's almost like you could hear there's an animalistic almost side to this album. It's very raw when you listen to it. It's so overdriven and intense that it really is powerful. And I think that's what we were trying to do with this, and that's kind of what I wanted to bring, was something just over the top, an over the top intensity that that you just can't match, and I think that's conveyed pretty well in this.
I think what I was inspired to do with this album was create music that was accessible to all listeners, but also appeal to musicians through the musicianship itself. I always kind of think of this music as a song first and foremost, but three players who are soloing essentially over the top of the song.
So what inspired me to write to write guitar parts for this album? In working with Jason and in AZIOLA CRY, I've always viewed the guitar as a counter voice to what he's got going on with his instrument. So every time we start an album, Jason usually lays out some ideas, and then he leaves those ideas with Tom and myself, and we sit and we work on parts that we hear, things that when we listen to that, our initial reaction, what do you hear as a counter reaction to what Jason has going on? So that's what inspired me and always inspires me to make music with Jason. I never know what's going to come out of the guitar next until it's actually working, and we like it. So that's my inspiration.
I think the inspiration for this was pretty easy for me. And again, referencing other projects that I've been a part of, like I've always kind of, you know, dug back in the tool chest and gone, oh, what could I use for this part? Oh, this great, like, you know, part from Hold Your Fire that I'm thinking of that would fit really well here, and if I could just make it my own. And I used to do a lot of that, and I still do. I mean, you learn from your influences and from people you've listened to. And I still draw from all that stuff. I mean, like every album that you see in here, not every one of them, but most of them I've drawn influence from and said, you know, wouldn't it be great to use that lick on, you know, what Nico McBrain did on the Iron Maiden first album and from Killers, and just, you know, apply that to a lick that Jason's doing. I really loved that, you know, like how can I use that? And I've done that before, but really on this album, a lot of it was a big part of the influence was actually just sitting in the room with Jason and Mike and listening to them and focusing in on what they were doing. And I would actually be inspired by what they were doing instead of having to draw it from somewhere. And sometimes that comes off way more authentic than, you know, trying to draw it from somewhere else. I've heard a lot of musicians, you know, try to draw influence from and oh, he sounds like, you know, he sounds like Carter Buford or something like that, you know, like he sounds a copycat of him or this or that. And I really try and stray away from that. Although we do get the occasional comments of, you know, oh, you guys sound like this, or your drummer sounds like that. And that's great. They're hearing the influences come through. But, you know, I think for me really strongly on this album, I was really influenced by what these guys were doing, and especially what Jason was doing. He's playing a Warr guitar. And, you know, where do you draw influence from that? I actually didn't even know a Warr guitar, what it was, before I joined this band. I had really no idea. I knew what a Chapman stick was, but, you know, only from, because of the Dream Theater album, Falling into Infinity. He used a Chapman stick on New Millennium. And I think that was one of the first times I had heard a Chapman stick, like, in a pop rock song, you know, like really driving the song, you know, and it actually starts with the Chapman stick. So anyways, hearing Jason play that instrument is inspiring enough for me. All I need to do is hear that and I can go, I know exactly what to do.
AZIOLA CRY comes from a poem by Percy Shelley. I studied a lot of poetry in high school, and Percy Shelley was a poet that stood out to me. One of his poems, entitled The Aziola, refers to hearing a sound, and throughout the poem he's trying to figure out what the sound is. Is it the sound of a lute? Is it the sound of the west wind? Is it the sound of a bird? And you get to the end and he realizes that he's not sure exactly what the sound is, but it's the most beautiful, sad sound he's ever heard.